Okay, what I've done here, started out with a 3/4 inch piece of 01 drill rod. So the large part of the collet is 700 thousandths. So I turned the entire length of what I'm going to be using down to that diameter, and then I marked the length of the taper. It's 300 thousandths. I marked that here with a cutoff tool, and then this is the overall length of the part, and I just marked it there with a cutoff tool. Now between these 2 points, I'm going to turn this down to this diameter, so it'll fit in that 9/16 collet. Alright, I've got this thing blanked out. I turned off the work lights on my lathe because it just casts a heck of a glare. But I have this turned down. I'm getting ready to turn the taper. And this is 558 thousandths, the same as this. And this is just clearance to get it into the body of the die holder. I don't think that's too critical. But I'm going to go ahead and lay out the length so I know how deep to drill and then ream. I'm going to go a little bit past so I can get the taper of that hand reamer all the way through. And then we're going to be turning this taper. It's a 15-degree taper, and that won't be too big of a deal at all. And then we're going to be almost done. When I get it drilled and then reamed, I'm going to go ahead and part it off to length, and then I'm going to reverse it in a 9/16 collet and use the collet to hold it nice and straight. And I'm going to be hand tapping, but I'll be using the lathe to help me get everything centered up, and you'll see what that's going to be about when I get to that point. Alright, I'm set up to drill. This is a 1/4 inch I'm going to use as a pilot drill, and then when I'm done with that I will go through with an end drill, which leaves me a little bit left to ream. I'll be hand reaming this, but on the lathe, using the tailstock center to hold me straight. And I just put a very unfancy little Sharpie mark there. I don't know if you can see it. And that'll stop me just a little beyond that scribe mark, to give room for the tapered part of the reamer to get all the way through the bore. Okay, this is the letter end drill. We're going to be going all the way through now, and I've done the same sort of Sharpie depth stop, if you will. Alright, this is my setup for reaming through. I'm hand holding the camera. All I'm doing, I'm using the tailstock center here. And I've got my long reach center in here just to keep the tap holder aligned while I ream. So I'm just taking about a turn, and then I'm just bumping this forward just a little bit to keep the center in place. Another turn, and just more of the same. I'm not forcing it or anything like that. It's cut nicely. It's a fairly new reamer. And just keep plenty of oil in those flutes, and they're going to flow in there where the oil needs to be. I've got the lathe in, well, this lathe doesn't have back gears, but I have it set to 80 RPM so that it would take quite a bit of force here to turn those gears. So I'm going to continue on until I've got the hole reamed. Okay, I got the reaming finished. It was a little slow going hand reaming. I wish I had a machine reamer, but I don't, so I used a hand reamer. So basically I blew the hole out. It's nice and clean. So here's my little plug test, which is the 308 round I'm making the collet for. So it goes in, and right there the collet stops the case mouth, and that's what you want it to do. And there's just a tiny little bit of lead-in chamfer there But yeah, that's what you want. You want the collet to stop the case so it only grips the round itself. So now we're ready to turn the taper, and then we'll part it off, reverse everything, and thread the other end for the drawbar. Alright, that's my setup for turning the taper. I brought a long reach tailstock live center up so it stays out of the way of the tool post and still supports the end of the work. And I have the compound set at 15 degrees. So I'm just going to take light passes back and forth. I can cut in either direction with that little universal turning tool on that. So I'm just going to take light passes until the taper meets the diameter that I turned earlier. And that should be it. Now, when I get it down to size, I will be taking some 220 and polishing the taper, because I want it to spin pretty freely and slide within the female taper in the puller body. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So I'm set up to part this off, and I've got a little scribe line, and I don't know if you can see it, but that's the total length of the piece, and I'm going to part off just a little bit beyond that, and then when I put this in a collet, I'm going to face it to that final length. And I just have a little wooden peg in here up to about right there to catch this when it parts off, because I don't want any dings in that. So I'll put the camera on a tripod and see if we can get some of the parting off. Alright, that worked pretty well. Okay, I turned the work around and I have it now on a 9/16 collet, and it holds it nice and snug. And the counter bore going into here I discovered was 3/8, and it only goes in about 1/8 of an inch. So I'm going to do that first. Okay, now I'm going to get set up and tap a thread. I have my measurement as far as how deep to thread in. It's roughly halfway through, and we'll be doing that next. Alright, so this is essentially the same setup we had when we rained. Got my tap just inside the hole, and I've got my little Sharpie mark on all 4 flutes. It's just the threading stops about 2 threads shy of the full length of the tap. So I'm going to get plenty of oil on this, and I've got the lathe set at a very low speed again. So I'm just giving pressure with the tailstock quill until I feel my tap starts to take a bite. Okay, I'm done on the lathe. All I did, I reversed this, came through this 9/16 collet, faced it to length, and then I used the tailstock center to get my tap started. And after about 3 turns, I took everything out, went over in the bench vise, and I finished tapping this. So we've got that part done, and pretty much all the easy stuff in this collet is done. And it threads in far enough. If you wanted to use that as a reference, it'd have to, see, it's able to pull the collet that far into the body, and of course it won't do that. It's just going to be flush. So we've got a good fit into the taper, and just about the same as this one. So now comes the tedious part, and that is slitting this thing. And all I'm going to do is, once again, I'm going to hold this in this 9/16 collet, and I'll use this one as an example, just about to there, torque it down real well, take it over to the mill, and once I find center, I'm just going to slit one side and then just roll this over 3 times and complete the other sides. I want to give you a look at my setup for cutting these slits. So that's a 40 thousandths slitting saw I have in there. It's high-speed steel, but I am taking it really slowly, running it at about 300 RPM, feeding it by hand, and just it's so far so good. I mean, it's not having any problem. I'm pretty much full depth, as you can see right there. And then all I did, just in the standard way, I just touched off at the top, and then, you know, located center. It's a 40 thousandths thick, so that was 20, and then half the diameter, and brought it down to my cutter's on center, so that's not going to move. And I'm just going to roll that collet block 3 more times after I complete this cut. And I've got a little layout line. I don't know if that'll show up. I got a little scribe line right here showing me where to stop my cut, and at which point I'm going to set that DRO up there to 0. And then just cut to that depth. And this is going to take a long time to keep from breaking that little cutter, but it's cutting nicely. So I'm instead of using full, you know, cutting oil, I've cut it with some WD-40, so it's really thin. What I want to do is cool the blade and wash those chips out of those tiny little teeth. So I've got some normal cutting oil, cut about half and half with WD-40, and it's working well. And we're just going to keep doing this very slowly until we get all 4 slits completed. Now here's just a little shot of the cut. I'm not going to go too far because honestly about every half crank I'm squirting oil on that thing. But you see the speed of the cutter, and I don't know if you can see the layout line back in there. I can see it pretty well just by eye. But I tried to calculate that to where I will come out of the cut right at that layout line before I, you know, get into my work holding devices, and I think I've got that. I'm probably moving this cutter in a thousandth or so at a time. Here's my feed rate. So it's time to shoot some oil in there. So as I said, I'll be back over on the bench when I get this done. It's going to take a little while. Okay, I got the slits cut, and with no disasters over on the mill. So then I took it and I put it back in the lathe, and I just polished the outside. All the burrs were on this side of the cut since the teeth were coming out this way. And then I polished the face of the taper up to about 600 grit, which I think is smooth enough. And then I did go inside of these and just made sure there weren't any burrs. I took a very small, very fine 3-corner file and just ran it in there just to make sure there aren't any burrs projecting and they're going to leave a mark on the copper jacket. And then I just took a rubber polishing bob that barely fit inside there, and it has emery in it on my Dremel tool, and I just polished inside of that a little bit, cleaned it all off. Last thing I have to do before I heat treat is I want to mark it in some way to indicate that it's for 30 caliber. And I'll probably just use a hand engraver. I don't want to try stamping something that small. And like I said, after I heat treat it, the little engraving will be there to stay, in case this ends up in the hands of somebody else someday. But I'm going to wait to heat treat. I have some knives over here I'd like to get ready to go into the furnace, and then heat treat this along with them. And that I won't show. This is probably going to be the final video on this little collet. I see no reason why it won't work. But it was fun making it, all the different steps, and a couple of different, machine tools involved, and we made a collet where none was available. Now they'll probably flood the market with these things, but hey, I had fun, and I had fun showing you guys. So this is the 308, the 30 caliber collet, and then this is the RCBS one for 338. You don't need a collet very often for pulling bullets, but when you do need one, there's just no substitute. So I'm glad I made this, and I was happy to bring you guys along. So maybe in some subsequent videos down the road, when I finally get around to pulling these bullets and doing all that, I will show you the setup of this working, and I'll do a quick little video on that. So anyway, guys, have a Merry Christmas, and I'll see you guys the next time I have something that is YouTube worthy. Thanks.